Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're headed to Spain to unpack some pretty fascinating dynamics between different generations there.
Yeah,
And it sounds like things are getting a little tense.
absolutely.
Economic anxieties are rising, clashing values are coming to the forefront, and some are even suggesting that a major societal shift could be on the horizon. So are you ready to break it all down?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Awesome. So, first things first, we need to understand what we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
What's the source material we're looking at for this deep dive?
Well, we're diving into the work of a Spanish author
Oh,
who really sees Spain as this kind of pressure cooker about to blow.
oh, wow. Okay.
They're seeing a generational crisis brewing, with each age group feeling increasingly misunderstood.
Oh, that's interesting. So almost like this feeling of marginalization.
Yeah, exactly. Like each generation is kind of siloed off and they're not understanding each other's experiences.
That makes a lot of sense. So how does this author break down these generational fault lines? Where are the biggest points of friction?
Well, they identify three main generations in Spain.
Okay.
We've got the boomers and pensioners, that's anyone over 58.
Gotcha.
Then the workers, those folks aged 30 to 58.
Mm.
And then the young people, everyone under 30.
Okay, so classic generational breakdown. And I imagine each group is facing its own unique struggles, right?
Absolutely. And that's where a lot of the tension comes from. They don't always see eye to eye on the solutions either.
Right. Different priorities, different perspectives.
Yeah.
So let's start with the boomers and pensioners. What's their take on this whole situation? How are they feeling?
Well, the author suggests they're largely content with the status quo.
Really?
They've got good pensions, many own their homes, and generally, enjoy a comfortable lifestyle. For example, think about it this way. 90% of Spaniards over 65 own their homes.
Wow. That's a huge number.
Yeah, compared to just 20% of those under 35.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
That's a pretty stark contrast.
Yeah, it's a huge difference in terms of economic security.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
They kind of benefited from a different economic reality, right?
exactly.
And their news sources, like traditional media, might not always reflect the struggles that younger people are facing.
Yeah, that's a key point. They might see a university education as the ticket to a stable career, but that's not necessarily true for younger generations.
It's not the guarantee it used to be.
Right, so there's a bit of a disconnect there. They might not fully grasp the anxieties of those coming up behind them.
So almost like a blind spot in a way.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it.
Okay, that's really interesting. So we've got the boomers and pensioners kind of comfortable in their position, but what about the workers? Those folks aged 30 to 58. They're kind of sandwiched between these two other generations, right?
Right, they're caught in the middle.
So where do they fit into all of this?
The author describes them as striving for the prosperity their parents enjoyed, but facing a totally different economic landscape. Imagine you're in your 40s, paying high taxes to support a large aging population, dealing with inflation, and maybe you're still waiting to inherit any wealth from your parents.
Oh, wow.
That's the reality.
That's tough. It's like they're trying to climb a ladder that's constantly getting taller,
Yeah.
and then they look down and see the even tougher climb that younger people are facing.
Right, exactly. And that's where the tension starts to build.
It's no wonder there's some friction there. So this generation, the workers, they seem to be really feeling the squeeze, right?
Absolutely. The author argues that they're increasingly aware that the social contract, that idea that hard work and education will automatically lead to a good life, is changing.
And it's maybe not as reliable as it used to be.
Exactly. And that makes them question whether that promise still holds true.
Right, because they're living the reality that it might not. Okay, so we've talked about the boomers, the workers, but what about the youngest generation? Those under 30. They're facing a whole different set of challenges, right?
Oh, absolutely. Think job insecurity, sky-high housing costs, and maybe even a sense that the traditional systems are failing them.
Yeah, it's a different world for sure.
Yeah. And they're turning to alternative information sources like YouTube and podcasts, which can further separate them from those older generations.
Right, it's like they're speaking different languages, getting their information from completely different worlds.
Exactly.
So how does the author see all of this playing out? Are they optimistic about the future of Spain?
Not exactly. They're particularly concerned about the potential for Bitcoin to disrupt the status quo.
Bitcoin. Okay, this is getting interesting.
Yeah, imagine a scenario where young people, frustrated with the traditional financial system, turn to cryptocurrencies as a way to opt out.
Wow, like a form of rebellion almost?
Kind of. And that could have huge implications for Spain.
I bet. for the economy, for society as a whole?
Yeah, it's a big unknown.
Okay, so we've got these 3 generations, each with their own set of anxieties and priorities.
Right.
And then you throw in this wild card of technology, potentially disrupting everything even further.
Exactly. It's a complex situation for sure.
It sounds like it. So where do we go from here?
Well, the author identifies 8 key elements that are driving this generational wedge even deeper.
Okay, so these are like the pressure points, the things we need to understand if we're going to address this.
Exactly. If we want to even begin to understand this growing crisis we're facing.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. Let's unpack those 8 elements. What's the first one driving this divide?
Well, it's that media divide we were just talking about. Each generation is getting their news from completely different sources.
Right, totally different universes.
Yeah. Boomers are more likely to stick with those traditional media outlets. While younger folks, they're all about YouTube, podcasts, social media,
Makes sense.
those platforms that older generations might not always trust.
Right. And that creates such different perceptions of reality.
Absolutely.
It's no wonder it's so hard to find common ground when you're getting your news from such different places.
Exactly.
Okay, so media divide, that's a big one. What's the next pressure point?
The next one is a biggie, especially for those workers stuck in the middle. It's the pension burden.
Okay, pensions, yeah.
Spain has a rapidly aging population.
Right.
And those generous pensions are getting, well, pretty expensive.
I imagine so.
Yeah. And the author points out that it puts a huge strain on the working population. They're the ones footing the bill through their taxes.
So it's almost like this financial tug-of-war between the generations.
Yeah, kinda.
The workers are feeling the squeeze, while the pensioners are enjoying these benefits that they earned in a different economic era.
Right, when things were a bit different.
What other friction points are there?
Next on the list is the housing crisis, which hits young people really hard.
Housing, yeah, that's a big one everywhere.
It is. Housing prices in Spain are, well, they're through the roof.
I can only imagine.
And guess who owns most of the property?
I'm going to guess the older generations.
Got it, figures. Which makes it incredibly tough for young people to buy a place,
Yeah, that makes sense.
to get on that property ladder.
To achieve that sense of independence.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a recipe for frustration,
It is.
for resentment, especially if you're stuck living with your parents much longer than you ever thought you would be.
Way longer.
And it makes building a future, like starting a family, all of those things,
Yeah,
so much harder.
absolutely.
Okay, what's next?
This one really hits home for the younger generation.
Okay.
Broken work promises.
Okay, so the idea that, you work hard, you get a good education,
Yeah, that classic path.
you get a stable, well-paying job,
Mm-hmm.
like that worked for their parents, their grandparents.
Right. The traditional path.
That's just not realistic anymore.
It's not.
They're facing precarious work, low wages, the whole gig economy thing.
Yeah, it's a different ballgame now.
And even if they find a good job, the cost of living is so high.
It eats up most of their income.
It's a struggle. What's the 5th element?
This one's all about numbers. Demographic imbalance.
Oh, okay, demographics.
Spain's birth rate is declining, while life expectancy is rising.
So you've got fewer young people
Right.
entering the workforce to support a growing elderly population.
Exactly. The math doesn't really work out long term.
It doesn't sound sustainable.
It's not. Not for Social Security. Not for economic growth.
So it's not only are they facing a tougher economic reality,
Right.
but there are fewer of them to share the burden.
Exactly. It's a recipe for, well, for potential disaster.
It really is. Okay, what's number 6 on the list?
It's connected to what we were talking about with the housing market.
Okay.
Delayed inheritance.
I see.
Older generations are living longer,
Right.
holding on to their wealth longer,
So younger people are inheriting later,
later in life.
if at all.
Yeah, if at all.
Wow.
So they're missing out on that, on that boost.
Financial boost.
Yeah, when they need it most.
To buy a house.
To start a business.
To invest in their future.
Exactly.
It's like they're stuck,
They are.
waiting for their lives to begin.
Kinda.
It's no wonder they feel disillusioned.
I get it.
What's the 7th element?
The author calls this one failing education.
Oh, education. Okay.
They see a decline in the quality of education, which raises concerns about whether the future workforce,
Right.
can sustain economic growth.
Will they have the skills they need
Exactly.
and support all of these social programs that we rely on?
It's a big question mark.
It's a vicious cycle, right?
It is.
Like it creates this anxiety for everyone.
Yeah.
Will there be enough skilled workers to support the aging population. Are young people getting the skills they need?
Exactly.
Okay, we've gone through 7 of the 8 elements. What's the final one?
This is a thought-provoking one. Bitcoin as an escape.
Oh, Bitcoin. Okay.
The author suggests that, young people are disillusioned with traditional systems
Right.
and might increasingly turn to cryptocurrencies
It's
as a way to create their own financial future.
outside of the system.
Yeah, independent of those structures they see as rigged against them.
It's almost like a generational rebellion,
Kind of.
but playing out in the financial realm.
Exactly.
So we've got these 8 pressure points, these elements
Right.
pushing the generations further and further apart.
It's a complex picture.
It paints a pretty bleak picture, to be honest.
It does.
But I'm assuming the author doesn't just leave us hanging with this sense of impending doom, right?
They don't. They do offer some solutions.
Okay, good. I was hoping so.
They argue that Spain desperately needs a new social contract.
Oh, okay. A new social contract. What does that even mean?
It's a set of agreements that takes into account the needs and concerns
Okay.
of all generations, not just one.
So how do we even begin to approach something that complex? Like rewriting the social contract.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. Where do we even start?
Well, the author outlines 5 key pillars
5 pillars.
for negotiation.
Okay.
Each one addressing a critical area of this tension we've been discussing.
Right.
They believe these pillars offer a starting point.
For a more equitable and sustainable future.
That's the hope.
Okay, I'm hooked. Let's delve into these pillars and see what solutions they propose. Where should we start?
Well, given that pension burden we discussed, pensions are at the top of the list.
That makes sense.
But it's not as simple as cutting benefits.
Right, it's more nuanced than that.
The author suggests a more thought-out approach.
All right, so let's unpack this. What does a nuanced approach to pensions look like?
Well, they suggest adjusting pensions based on a pensioner's disposable income. That way, everyone's got enough to live comfortably, but you're preventing, excessive payouts that could strain the system.
Right, it's about finding that balance.
Exactly. And they also propose gradually raising the retirement age.
Makes sense.
Acknowledging that people are healthier and living longer than previous generations.
Yeah, it's a different reality now.
It is.
Okay, so pensions, that's the first pillar. What about the second?
The second focuses on the public sector and taxes.
Okay.
And the author is pretty straightforward here.
Oh.
They argue that Spain needs to, slim down its bureaucracy,
Right.
reduce the tax burden, especially on younger generations.
That's a common theme in a lot of places these days, isn't it?
It is.
But how do they actually propose achieving that?
Well, they talk about attracting young people into the public sector,
Okay.
bring in fresh perspectives, new skills, to modernize the workforce.
It's not just about cutting jobs. It's about making things more efficient.
Yeah, working smarter, not just harder.
That's exactly. Okay, what about the third pillar?
Third pillar is tackling that big elephant in the room,
Which is?
public debt.
Ah, yes, the debt.
Spain has a massive debt,
Right.
and the author argues it's a huge burden on future generations.
That makes sense.
So they call for responsible fiscal policies.
No.
Get spending under control, stimulate economic growth.
Okay, sounds like a big task. What's the fourth pillar?
This one might be a bit controversial.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Immigration.
Immigration. Okay.
The author believes Spain needs to attract millions of immigrants
Okay.
to address that demographic imbalance
Mm-hmm.
and bolster the workforce.
But isn't that a sensitive topic?
It is.
Especially with youth unemployment already a concern.
Absolutely. The author acknowledges those concerns, but they emphasize the need for, attracting the right kind of immigrants.
So skilled workers, entrepreneurs.
Exactly. Those who can contribute to the economy, create opportunities, not just fill low-wage jobs.
Right. A more strategic approach to immigration.
That's the idea.
Okay, that makes sense. We've covered 4 of the 5 pillars. What's the final one?
The final one is, it's probably the most radical: private jurisdictions.
Private jurisdictions. What does that even mean?
The author calls them Micropolis. Think of them as self-governing cities within Spain.
Wait, cities within a city?
Yeah, each one with its own tailored rules and regulations.
I've never heard of that before. How would that even work?
The idea is to attract specific demographics
Okay.
and tailor the regulations to their needs. So imagine a micropolis designed for retirees
Okay.
with amazing healthcare,
Gotcha.
or one specifically for tech startups.
Oh, I see.
Minimal bureaucracy, a focus on innovation.
That's a pretty wild concept. But wouldn't that just create more division?
The author argues that actually Micropolis done right could reduce those divisions
House.
by giving people more choice
Okay.
and control over their lives.
So they can choose the system that works best for them.
Exactly. It's bold, but they believe it could really unlock Spain's potential.
This has been a wild ride. We've explored the anxieties of 3 generations in Spain.
Yeah.
We've unpacked the 8 elements driving them apart, and now these 5 really bold pillars for, well, for building a new social contract.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. So where does the author leave us? What's their final takeaway?
Well, they believe that Spain is at a crossroads.
Okay.
It can either continue down this path of division and decline or embrace change.
And forge a new path forward.
Exactly.
This has been an incredibly thought-provoking deep dive.
And it has.
It's given us all a lot to think about. And as always, we want to hear from you. If you were at that negotiating table, crafting this new social contract, what would your priorities be? What compromises would you be willing to make for a more unified and prosperous Spain? Let us know. This isn't just Spain's problem, it's a global challenge. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.